The first batch of South Africa's 1 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses have been dispatched to 18 AU member states. The countries receiving the injections include Nigeria, Senegal, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Liberia, Egypt and Uganda. Joining us to discuss this sale further is freelance health journalist Laura Lopez-Gonzalez. Laura, very good afternoon. Thank you for speaking to us on this Good Friday. My first question is this a little bit of egg off the face of the Department of Health?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and I think that you probably find a lot of scientists are divided on that issue. So as you'll remember, in the beginning of the year, there was a small study that showed that the AstraZeneca vaccine was not effective in preventing mild to moderate COVID-19 caused by the variant that we have here in South Africa. The thing is, though, that vaccine trial was not able to show whether the vaccine protected against severe COVID-19 disease, hospitalizations, deaths. So that's always been a kind of a question that's haunted this vaccine. After those initial results take place, obviously South Africa chooses not to go forward with its rollout, yet the World Health Organization, reviewing the data, continues to suggest the use of AstraZeneca vaccine for countries like South Africa with variants. And they did that because they looked at the data and they said it's plausible that this vaccine could still protect against severe COVID-19 disease caused by the variant that we have. And so this is what's really divided scientists in South Africa, and I think you see a lot of those tensions coming to the fore at the moment.
Now, globally, there's also been suggestions that AstraZeneca causes blood clots. Again, that is unproven. Some countries have stopped using it and again have started using it again. Could this be one of the reasons that there was obviously some confusion here in South Africa?
Well, I think that those results, which again, like you've said, have not been proven, the European Medicines Agency, which is their drug regulator, has looked into those claims. It's a very small number of cases. They haven't yet proven a definitive link. Some doctors are saying, it's something to be aware of. It may, in very, very rare cases, exacerbate some conditions that are treatable if you know what to look out for. But that data really comes much after South Africa makes its decision. So sources that I've spoken to have said that decision within the Ministerial Advisory Committee and government to forego the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine was not a given, that there was very rigorous and quite heated debates. And I think this is something that you typically see in policy making when the science is contested, when we don't have a perfect sort of data set, when we have data gaps, as we have with AstraZeneca. And so at the moment, South African scientists are sort of divided about whether or not South Africa should have kept these jabs and offered them to high-risk people, saying, listen, this is what we do and we don't know, and whether or not that could have possibly provided some high-risk people with protection in a best-case scenario. A worst-case scenario, some scientists are arguing, listen, it wouldn't have added any extra protection, but, it wouldn't have done any harm. Of course, members of the Ministerial Advisory Committee have said that decision would have also come with costs. Professor Barry Shube saying that he was concerned that should the AstraZeneca vaccine not protect against severe COVID disease caused by the variant here, that it would have fueled vaccine hesitancy in the country. So again, it's a heated debate that's sort of being played out right now in the pages of South African medical journals.
Now, this morning you tweeted, obviously, that these doses have finally been sold. There was a response to that tweet, and somebody talked about the expiration of it. And conversations around this vaccine is expiring in April, I think is what we learnt a couple of months ago. Is it expiring in April?
Right.
And obviously, just how much of an embarrassment is it, or was it, certainly to the Ministry of Department of Health for acquiring this and not being able to roll it out in that expected period?
Well, I think the most important thing to sort of note is that those doses are not expiring in April. Those doses have been given another 3 months. I spoke recently again to Professor Barry Shube, and the Serum Institute of India, which produces the vaccines, have cleared them and said that they're safe for another 3 months. So the doses are not expiring. I think what's really important to understand is that policymakers, government, are making the best choices they have with the data available. So when South Africa ordered the AstraZeneca vaccines, it was showing a 75% efficacy rate against COVID-19 in South Africa. Then October comes and the variant starts to pop up, and that efficacy drops quite sharply. So I don't think that this is something that government should be embarrassed about. I don't think that there was any wrongdoing in ordering this vaccine. Again, this vaccine is making up the backbone of Africa's vaccine rollout right now. So I think it's just about understanding that in a pandemic like this, the data...
So it's the backbone of Africa outside of South Africa. I mean, what makes it so different, if I have to ask?
Right. So I think what you can kind of see in who's picked up the extra doses from us, that it's mostly North and West African countries. There are some concerns among our neighbors about picking up this vaccine because of the variant and the decisions that South Africa has taken. However, the COVAX facility, which is a big procure of vaccines for Africa and developing countries. A lot of those jabs are AstraZeneca, and there's been a sort of a global partnership with the Serum Institute to kind of get affordable vaccines into Africa because, again, we started off on the back foot. Rich countries bought up the bulk of vaccines by September last year, and so the rest of the global south has really been scrambling. So I think countries are making their own decisions. The variant that we have here in South Africa has been picked up outside of our borders, for instance, in Botswana. It's unclear yet, and this is something I've asked the WHO about, whether or not the variant that's become dominant here in South Africa has become dominant in other countries. But I think certainly you're seeing some hesitancy, and this has been confirmed by government officials in recent weeks, even to Parliament, that there has been some hesitancy to use the AstraZeneca vaccine in other Southern African countries.
Now, what we're aware of is that this is a billion-dollar industry. Now, is there a simmering fight between big pharma companies that we are seeing playing out globally over which vaccines are used?
I don't think that there is a big fight against sort of among big pharma. I think that we have maybe like a dozen sort of front runner vaccine candidates. There are a lot more in the pipeline that are still in clinical trials. But I think that really the big issue here is how many vaccines can the world produce. So before the pandemic, on average, the world would produce about 4 billion vaccine doses every year. To give you an idea of what we need to fight COVID-19, we need 14 billion. And vaccine capacity is something that's very difficult to ramp up quickly. So I think there's not really, it's kind of a sort of a seller's market at the moment because everyone needs these vaccines and there's a shortage.
So who decides or what determines what vaccines are used where outside of the variant? Also bearing in mind that if there are multiple variants, not everyone is going to be affected by a single one.
Right. And I think the important thing to also remember is that variants happen all the time. Most of the time, they don't really change the way that the virus behaves or how vaccines sort of react to it. The variant that we have here in South Africa, unfortunately, has changed how quickly the virus spreads and also, again, reduced some efficacy in some of the vaccines. So what you're seeing is that countries are trying to track this all the time. The World Health Organization is reviewing the data all the time to issue recommendations, but countries don't have to follow those recommendations all the time. So again, you're having national governments look at the data, look at availability of vaccines. The African Union is procuring for countries in Africa. African countries are also pursuing bilateral agreements with pharmaceutical companies. So really, you're having national governments take those decisions on their own.
Now, the one thing that we have seen is a number of players coming into the market and saying that they are developing their own vaccines, don't have a huge track record. Can they be trusted? Because I'd like to think that a huge amount of R&D and equally huge amount of funding goes into the process of developing a vaccine that actually works.
Right. So, I think we've seen that the vaccine research and development pipeline accelerated during COVID-19, but scientists have done so, trying to do sort of stages in parallel that used to go sort of sequentially. Vaccines are still very heavily regulated, so you can feel confident that whatever you get as a final sort of vaccine in South Africa is very safe and effective. But I do think you see a lot of new kind of players on the market, and a lot of that is also in the mRNA vaccine space, because some of those vaccines are easier to make than some of the other kinds of vaccines, which is why some activists in access to medicine fields are thinking that investing in some mRNA production capacity might be a possibility for global South countries. But I think you're seeing different types of players come in. Everyone has to go through the same regulation. Everybody will have to go through the same SAPR approval. So when they put their drugs or their vaccines for approval in South Africa, at the end of the day, you can still feel very confident about the vaccine you'll be getting.
Final question, Laura, before we let you go. Do you think AstraZeneca will make a comeback to South Africa, or is that divorce settlement officially complete?
I think that it would take data from human trials about the severity of COVID-19 and whether the vaccine was effective to prevent that against the variant we have here. Those clinical trials are no longer happening in South Africa, but scientists that worked on the AstraZeneca trial have said that that kind of data might come from other African countries that are using the AstraZeneca vaccine. So I think only time will tell, but I think that the government and the Ministerial Advisory Committee will be looking for some very hard, clear data about the effectiveness before they do that.
Laura Lopez Gonzalez, thank you kindly for speaking to us this afternoon. When we